Welcome everyone. Today we will look at writing a literature review. So the contents for today would be summarizing what we discussed last time, and then we will summarize what a literature review is. Then we look at the structure of an article, and then we look at citations and references, how to cite and how to write the references according to the style that you have to follow, and look at the publication process in brief, and then some writing tips. Alright, let's get started. So we talked about the dominant KPI of research, and we would say that it is the publications. But also we know that the process of making you an independent researcher is what is truly important. Then secondly, we looked at why we should write. Firstly, to preserve knowledge, and secondly, for reproducibility. What that means is someone else who is reading your publication should be able to reproduce the work that you did, reproduce the experiments that you did, and obtain the same results that you obtained, and verify what you saw. Then this funny statement, good writing is imitation. Of course, this does not mean that we must plagiarize, but this means something different. What this means is we must see a few well-known papers in the area and the journal that you want to put your work to, and then imitate what these great writers have done. So we have realized that the science literature has discovered a particular way of presenting an argument and presenting your methodology and the results and conclusions. So we follow that so that others who read our work can easily understand, easily follow our argument. Then referring to the structure, we thought about the introduction and the literature search, the methods section, the results section, the discussion section, and the conclusion. What is in parentheses may be incorporated into other sections in some publications. So this is the typical structure. It may sometimes change depending on the journal that you submit to, but this is the typical structure. Also, the thing about the hourglass is that we must go from general to specific to general, or in other words, start with broad statements, go for narrower statements, and then end with broad statements. This coincides with, for example, the abstract and introduction, and then these are methods, results, and so on, and here the conclusion. So even within those sections you must have this hourglass structure, general to specific to general. Then when we think about the steps in writing the literature search, first of all we know that we have to find and read relevant articles. Then we have to organize what we have read, finding key areas of knowledge, key themes under which you have to gather these articles and organize them logically and provide transition between these areas. If you take two areas, how are these areas related to each other, and so on. And then associate papers and summarizing them and associating them with areas in particular. Purpose of each paper must be understood, and we have to know the assumptions under which that paper is based on and the main claims of each of these papers. And then in the evaluation phase, we identify the gaps in these papers. So our literature search actually must lead to the research gap. So when we identify the research gap or establish the research gap or argue for the research gap through the literature, we have a very nice platform or the background or the backdrop to present our own work. How can these papers be applied? We have to evaluate. How do these existing papers demand a new solution? And you see, for this gap, you provide this new solution. And that kind of an argument will be very well received by the readers, the reviewers, and so on. Alright, Then we thought about how to search for literature last time. The first thing to do is to ask your supervisors, and perhaps your supervisors would be able to show you the 10 most important recent and influential papers that you have to read to get started with your work. Then that's a great advantage. Anyways, we must know the top journals and top conferences in our area. Some areas work primarily with journals, but if you think about areas like computer vision, which I'm involved with, we primarily focus on conferences also in addition to the journals. We have to specify these areas, and we have to know the topic that we are searching for. Otherwise, we can get too distracted by large number of plethora of available literature, and every single piece of work will look relevant to our work if you do not have the specificity in our search. So your supervisor and colleagues can help you in this regard to specify what you should search for. And perhaps you can list the questions and find answers through this literature. So you can see it's a focused literature search that we are talking about. Anyways, we must do a keyword search in Google before we start any work and before we spend too much time in that work. Sometimes we would find out, okay, that's a new idea that came to your mind, but it has been well researched 10 years ago. So a simple Google search will help you, a keyword search. All right, now coming to the proper phase of literature search. First, we use an academic search engine like Google Scholar or CiteSeer to find the papers using well-chosen keywords. So if you can find 5 recent papers, that would be great. And then we do one pass on each to get a sense of the work. Then read the relevant works sections. You find a thumbnail summary of the recent works and perhaps a pointer to a recent survey paper. Then you are lucky because you found a summary of all the recent work relevant to your topic. So second, refer to shared citations within. What this means is, these papers cite related work. So assume that you have 5 papers now listed. Now all these 5 papers refer to one single paper 2 years ago, for example. Now that paper must be important. So we must read that paper as well. So refer to papers that cite these papers. Now maybe this appeared in 2020, and in 2021 several papers cite this one. Several papers cite this. So therefore this must be an important paper, and these also you have to read and pay attention to them. So do not worry about this at the very beginning, but when your research matures, you have to worry about these papers, papers that cite the 5 papers that you found, and so on. Then once you identify these, then you will know who are the main people who work in your area, and go to their websites of key researchers and see what they have published recently. What are these top conferences and journals? What are the ideas that they usually talk about now? And try to see what these people are up to. What are they up to? Now that's a great question to ask. And if you can decipher that, that means your literature search is more or less complete. So go to the top websites of these top conferences and look through their recent proceedings also. So when you identify these conferences and journals, see their recent proceedings and know the topics that they are popularly talking about right now. All right. So when you look for papers, we discussed how to establish credibility. We looked at a few criteria that have been helpful to me. You also can come up with your own criteria, but these are some of them. What are the major journals and conferences in the specialized research field of yours? And of them, what are the impact factors? What is the general low-level impact factor of your area? And based on that, you can see what are the good journals by looking at their impact factors. So this impact factor depends on the area also. There is an area harmonized impact factor also, but anyways, when you look at the impact factor in relation with your field of research, you will be able to make a judgment of what good journals are. And for the journals, look at the quartile. So quartile 1 journals are the good ones, ensure that your journals are quartile 1 so that you read important and credible papers. And for conferences and journals, you can look for the H index. For example, if you take H5 index is 30, what that means is over the last 5 years, 30 papers in that conference have been cited at least 30 times. So Google metrics can help. So in Google metrics, you have the areas and sub areas. So within your sub area, there are top 20 forums, conferences and journals. So you should look for papers that appear in those. Then you can look for who the publisher is. So is it a reputed publisher? Is a reputed scientific society involved, and so on. These are not very decisive criteria, but these publisher and so on can also help you. So we looked at the don'ts also. Don't look at journals not sponsored by a society, at least start. Do not read journals that charge money for publishing, at least at start. Do not read journals that are only electronic or only in print, at least at start. Do not read the archives papers, at least as a start, and so on. Okay. And then we looked at how to read a paper. So we looked at 3 passes: first pass, the second pass, and the third pass. So in the first pass, spend about 10 minutes to get a general idea about the paper. Do not read a paper from start to the end at the very beginning. Just take a general idea of the paper. And then in the second pass, that lets you grasp the paper's content, but not the very details of the paper. Maybe you can spend about 1 hour for that. And in the third pass, that helps you understand the paper in depth, 4 or 5 hours for beginners. So usually you have to read papers several times to understand, especially when you're reading the first couple of papers. You have to spend a lot of time to understand because there will be a lot of concepts that you do not understand in your field. So there are details which we covered last week. Okay, now we move on to writing the actual literature review, and I will talk about other related concepts also. So this is something that we looked at last week also, projecting power and authority. This is very important when you write a literature review. So I have taken this from this book. Surviving a Dissertation. So let's read this. Illuminators 2010 conducted a study on the effects of seasonal light on major depression by comparing the rates of depressive illness among residents of Seattle and San Diego during different times of the year. He hypothesized that there would be more depression in the northern city than the southern city, and more depression during winter time than during summer. His findings confirm this hypothesis. So when you look at this, you see the focus is on this author and that paper. And this is not what we want. So the strategy must be to develop a theme and then cite work of relevant authors to support an argument. Now in a literature search, what we want to do is, starting with these papers, starting with the literature, we must arrive at the gap, research gap. That's our intention is. And through your arguments, by using several paragraphs of argument, you must establish that this gap exists. And then you propose your solution to this gap. Now this is the flow that would be well received by the reviewers and the readers. So starting with the literature, establish the gap and propose a solution. In order to do that, we do not just talk about what this author did, what that author did, and so on, but we look at the themes that appear in this very relevant area of literature. So in other words, this is something that I extracted from what Professor Priyanda has said. Do not go along this axis of mentioning names of authors and describing, but identify the 3 or 4 themes in your area of research. Aspect 1, theme 1, aspect 2, aspect 3, aspect 4, and go along that axis. So when you categorize for each theme several papers, and you discuss about that theme, for this theme several papers, for this theme several papers, for this theme several papers, and so on, then your literature search would be very nice, and it will be also a good contribution for the readers. Alright, now let's look at a revised version of that example. Here you see the thematic emphasis, where the topic of the paragraph is There is a reason to believe that differences in seasonal lighting can affect the extent of depressive illness. For instance, residents of Seattle, a northern city, are reported to have higher rates of depression than residents of San Diego, a southern city, and these differences are accentuated during the winter time. And then you cite the paper, suggesting that relative darkness may exacerbate I don't know how to pronounce that word, mood disorders. All right, so can you see? You can see that we use the paper to argue for us in that paragraph. So we usually do not use excessive quotations, but we use rephrasing our own interpretations of the work. So anyways, adapting a critical perspective in reading related work is very important. And sometimes we have to ensure, not sometimes we have to ensure that we include contradictions also. So we are making an argument who contradicts with that argument, and we have to include them and argue against them if possible. All right. Then last week we discussed about the background literature, relevant literature and very relevant literature, and we said that the background would be giving the very broad picture and a slightly focused picture in the relevant literature, and in very relevant literature we give a very focused view of this topic that we want to talk about. And so we said it's a good way to think about how to align this. So background literature will go into the introduction mainly, and then relevant literature would go into introduction, literature review and method. And then if you think about the very relevant literature, they would be discussed in results also, where you use their numbers and their results to compare with yours. So seminal papers and paradigm shifting papers are also important, and you have to usually mention them in the introduction. Okay, so today we will look at plagiarism. That's an important thing. So we have to be original in our work, and we have to give due credit to the original authors of some work. So plagiarism is the use of another's work, words or ideas without attribution. The word plagiarism comes from the Latin word kidnapper and is considered a form of theft, a breach of honesty in the academic community. So we discussed about the honor system in the academic world. Now, if you are a reviewer, you do not reveal what you reviewed for the conference before it gets published. So if you are a reviewer and you know that this paper that you review has been written by one of your students, you do not reveal that, you declare a conflict of interest. So like that, this honor system is important. So that's how the academic world runs. So you do not lie in your work, you do not give credit to the original authors, and this is a part of the honor system. So three main categories according to these sources: use sources language without quoting, using information from a source without attribution, and paraphrasing a source in a form that stays too close to the original. So these are forms of plagiarism. So but can't you use other people's ideas? Can't you quote? Of course you can, but with right attribution. So how do you give them credit or attribute? By using quotation marks when you're quoting, and using citations. Some use author year mode, or in IEEE use brackets. So we will look at these ways of citing. By using these, you can avoid plagiarism. So always cite in the following cases: when you quote two or more words verbatim, or even one word in a way unique to the source, you must use quotations as well as cite the source. When you introduce facts you have found in a source, you must use citations. When you paraphrase or summarize ideas, interpretations or conclusions that you find in a source, you must cite. When you introduce information that is not common knowledge, or that may be considered common knowledge in your field, that the reader may not know, then you must cite. Because in this case, not only to avoid plagiarism, of course, because your reader would want to go to that original source and read about it and get to know more about the argument that you're making and about that work. So therefore it is very important to cite. This is how the science world progresses, by building up on the existing world. So we say that we have to stand on the shoulders of the giants so that you can see far. So this is kind of something that you owe to your readers. When you borrow the plan or structure of a larger section of source's argument, example, using a theory from a source and analyzing the same 3 case studies that the source uses, you must cite. When you build on another's method found either in a source or from collaborative work in a lab, you must cite. When you build on another's program in writing, computer code or not commonly known algorithm, you must cite. When you collaborate with others in producing knowledge, you must cite. And so you see, whenever you use something from others, you must cite. So there's a thing called self plagiarism. This means you are using work from your own previous paper. That is called self-plagiarism. So you cannot do that. So some journals would say, oh, if you publish that this same work in a conference, you must expand it by 60% to be acceptable to the journal, but you have to clearly declare. So some part of the work was published in a conference. So this kind of thing. So self-plagiarism is also not acceptable. All right. So let's go through a brief quiz. So you can think about these answers and I'll show you the answers afterwards. Okay, first one. In a literature review, the strategy is to develop a theme and then cite the work of relevant authors to support the argument. Provide noteworthy examples or counterexamples. This is true or false? So you can see it's true. Second one, when quoting a small portion of text from another source, it is sufficient if we use quotation marks. Actually, it's not sufficient. We must use quotation marks and cite also. If you paraphrase from a source, it is not necessary to cite. It's absolutely false. If we cannot republish our own work in its entirety or reuse portions of a previously written text while authoring a new work. So that is self-plagiarism. We have to avoid self-plagiarism. So I extracted this from this website. Yes, that is true. Okay. I hope you got this right. Okay, let's move on. So what we discussed up to now was briefly the purpose of the literature search, to know the state of the art. And we must form a congruent argument starting with literature and ending up with the gap. And this gap should lead to a solution. And we have to project authority by using the thematic approach, not the author-based literature discussion approach. And we briefly looked at background, relevant and very relevant literature, and how to cite, where to cite. Not how to cite, where to cite. Okay. So now let's briefly look at the structure of an article. So other lecturers would also talk about this, but since this is important to the placement of the literature search, we will discuss this. So general to specific to general, the hourglass shape we have understood, and this is a very nice document if you can read. An article begins with broad general statements, progressively narrows to the specifics of your study, and then broadens out again to more general considerations. So general to specific to general. So the thing is, this hourglass structure is there in the whole document, your dissertation or the article, but also even within this, even if you take the abstract or the introduction or the method or the results or the conclusion, some kind of an hourglass structure must be present. Even within the abstract, we like to have the general to specific to general kind of format. Even within the introduction, we like to have that perspective. This is what creates understanding. Also, now you must know how to connect this paragraph with the introduction. Yeah. So those transitions are also very important. Now, even if you take the introduction, see, the introduction may have 3 paragraphs. Between the 3 paragraphs, the transition is important. So you say something at the end here, then here you have to say something like in addition. Another fact is like that, using some phrase or some conjunction or some way, you connect with the previous paragraph. Even if you take one paragraph of this, even if you take one paragraph of this, you must have the hourglass structure, and you have the key sentence and the concluding sentence. The second sentence must follow from the first sentence. You must give these conjunctions, transitions, and so on. Then only people would be able to follow an argument. Otherwise, it will be just a bag of sentences. Bag means there is no order, just a collection of sentences. So that will not convey meaning to the person who is reading your literature. So therefore, it is very important to provide transitions and connect sentences. So remember this structure also. So if you think about the structure of a thesis, title, page, abstract, I think the acknowledgement must go here. Table of contents, list of figures, list of tables, introduction, literature survey, materials and methods, results, discussions, conclusions, reference, appendices. And even if you take the structure of a paper, a research paper, see these are more or less the same. So this is the way the scientific community communicates with each other. So therefore, it is good to adhere to this structure and properly understand what this structure truly means. So some few tips about writing an abstract, especially for computer science, from Professor Koopman. So it has 5 parts: the motivation, problem statement, approach, results, and conclusion. So here also you can see some kind of an hourglass. Motivation is a general motivation, and the conclusion is more general compared to the problem statement, approach, and the results. So you can see approach is the most specific. So general to specific to general format, or broad to narrow to broad format is there even in this. The motivation is why do we care about the problem and the results. Then problem statement is what problem are you trying to solve, what is the scope of your work, a generalized approach or a specific situation. Like that you specify what your problem statement is. And then approach, how did you go about solving or making progress in the problem. Then results, what is the answer. Sometimes you can present numbers as your results, the most important ones, and what are the implications of your answer as a conclusion. Then the importance of revision, I need to stress. Now this is not only valid for a literature search, it is valid for any document that you would write. Read it by yourself many times. So if you finish writing tonight, the following morning you have to read it. Do not just finish writing and try to reread it. That does not help you to find the mistakes that you made on your own. Read it several times. And then some revision strategies that people use is ask others to read. First, an expert in your area, a colleague who truly understands your work. Maybe a general reader in your field, maybe a colleague in your department who is not in the same field as yours. Maybe a non-field researcher or reader also. Then if all 3 people say that they can make sense of your work, some sense of your work, that means your writing is good, and revise again. Okay, so as a prelude to what I would say, I'll give you some trivia about this text and latex, but this is not a latex discussion, so just to keep you enthusiastic. So TeX is a typesetting system designed mostly written by Donald Knuth, and this person from Professor Knuth from Stanford University, he wrote this Art of Computer Programming books, and he is called the father of analysis of algorithms. So LaTeX is a document preparation system based on TeX, and Leslie Lamport made this, and in the scientific community, science, mathematics, us also computer science, the electronics department also, we use LaTeX to write our papers, thesis, and so on. So some story about Knuth is like, if you find a mistake in one of these books Knuth authored, and if you are the first one, you would receive a check with this much money, so that represents some number. So this is considered as one of the most prized treasures of in computer science. Okay, citations and references. So we can use the BibTeX system in LaTeX to cite papers. So, or you can use Microsoft Word to do that. So there's a small video I created for you to be able to do this in Microsoft Word. I know that some of you may be using Microsoft Word, not LaTeX for your work, but if you can, please use LaTeX. The typography would be beautiful, but Word is okay. So you go to the References tab in Microsoft Word, which is right here, And there are three things that you have to do to cite an article that you read. First of all, the first thing is you have to manage your sources. That means add your articles to the database. And you have to select a style also, IEEE, APA, and so on. And then you have to insert citations. So like this, you see, like this, you have to insert citations. So in that IEEE style, you use brackets, and then in APA style, you can use both year format, and so on. Then you cite. So here and there within the text you cite, and then you add your bibliography usually at the end. So there are different ways. Some people add a bibliography for each chapter. Those are slightly more complicated things. We don't have to look at them now, but at the end you can add the bibliography. Okay, so for this, reference managers can be used to extract them, but I don't use them. I have BibTeX database myself, which has thousands of papers that I have collected over the years. The references of them. We'll briefly look at these reference managers. I do not know too much about them, but we'll briefly look at least at Mendeley. Okay, so there are many citation styles. It depends on your field. We are in electronic and telecom engineering, electronics, computer science, and so on. We use the IEEE style of Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers in the US. It's use citations as brackets, and then there's a format where bibliography is listed at the end. Then the APA style, most of you who are not in computer science or electronics engineering may use APA, American Psychological Association, or also date format. For example, this or this. And MLA style is also another style. Then Chicago style, Harvard style, and so on. So you can use overleaf if you want to use a LaTeX and cite this, or you can one way of using LaTeX is to install a MikTeX-like system on your machine, or you can use the web system overleaf. Then you can use LaTeX to apply one of these styles. Otherwise, the second option is, of course, writing your article in Word. Then you would be using the references tab. Okay. So briefly about Mendeley. So these are reference managers. So this is an example I did. I actually do not use this because I have another way of managing my references. So for example, let's say if I want to look at using infinite impulse responses in convolution neural network. So if that is the theme, so I can collect papers on that theme. About optic flows, I can collect. So I can use my own keywords, and under those themes I can gather papers. So if you use Google Scholar or some academic search engine, from there directly you can import your references to this. So therefore you can nicely manage them, and I think you can export them also to make a bibliography using reference managers. Okay, so there are many of them, many reference managers. So I extracted this from Wikipedia, so you can look at them. So Mendeley also is listed here. Some people use Zotero. Some people use Zotero, and then I know some people use JabRef, and so on. So different people use different things. So you can compare the features and select what you like. I encourage you to use one of these things so that you keep your references in an organized manner. So we'll look at the IEEE referencing style first. So how do you apply this style? If you are using LaTeX, then using BibTeX you can do that. So the second way is using Microsoft Word. So for which I created a small video, use the references tab of Microsoft Word to do this. Okay, so in the IEEE format or any other format, there are required fields. So if you take an article, that means a journal paper, you call them transactions, articles, and so on. Then author, title, journal name, year, volume, number, pagination, and month are mandatory fields. So volume is usually the year. So maybe if it has been started 20 years ago, this year would be 21st volume. And number means usually the month. That means that journal has 12 issues per year. So for month of May, it would be the it would be volume, issue would be fifth issue. So volume and the number, we call it issue. So, but some journals will have like 4 issues per year and so on also. So pagination, the page numbers from 535 to maybe 548, like that. So some number of pages and so on. If you take a book is by an explicit publisher, author or the editor, title, publisher, year, and then there are these optional fields, volume, number, series, address, edition, month, and so on. So I usually consider edition to be a mandatory field. So all these mandatory fields must be collected by you. So if you use Google Scholar and look at the citations that it gives, sometimes it may lack the important or mandatory fields. So fill all the mandatory fields. Unless you fill those mandatory fields, your references would not be complete. And if you cite your references and list your references in a not so appropriate manner with missing fields, people who read this, the reviewers, would think that you do not know the business. So therefore, pay extreme care to the way that you list these references. So if you take a conference, an article in a conference proceedings, author, title, book title, that means the proceedings of what conference, year, pages, and usually the address. I usually put the address also where it was held. For US addresses in the IEEE format, you would say maybe Los Angeles, CA, to say California. For any other and Canada also, you say the state and you say the city and the state. For any other country, you would write the country's name, city, and the country's name. So there are these optional fields also. PhD thesis, that can also be author, title, school, and year. Then website, for a website, author, title, date, publication, website URL, date of access is also important. So use referred material, avoid websites as much as possible. But I know some people are extremely indebted to some website that they read web article, so they want to cite it, or a manual or some software. So if they want to really want to cite it, then you can cite websites. But try to concentrate more on these when you use references. Okay, so this is from the IEEE manual, this references guide. References need not be cited in text. When they appear on the line in square brackets inside the punctuation. Grammatically, they may be treated as if they were footnote numbers, for example. But this do not adhere to this instruction. Always cite every reference that you have in the references section. Example of the first one, as shown by Brown, then 4 and 5, as mentioned earlier, like that, Smith and Brown, Jones, and like that. So you understand how to do that. So this will automatically happen if you use Microsoft Word or BibTeX in LaTeX. So you see now getting this 4 to 7, that means 4, 5, 6, and 7, those references, right? So these kind of things are automatically handled by LaTeX if you use the proper commands and so on. Note, use et al. And others when 3 or more names are given for a reference cited in the text. 3 or more names are given. Or as nouns. I usually do not use it, but you can use them as nouns as demonstrated in 3. So 3 is used as a noun according to 4 and 6 to 9. So I usually do not use them, but you are free to use them according to IEEE style. Okay. So here is some example that I did in IEEE style. So this paragraph, do not read this paragraph. This paragraph is very bad. I just wanted to show how books, conferences, journals, and so on appear. So it is very important to correctly format references. Here the references have been formatted according to the IEEE style. For example, Lamport, this is the Leslie Lamport's LaTeX article. Foguera and Long are books. See how author, the italicized title, the edition, the publisher, and the year included. Kalman, this very famous Rudolf E. Kalman's 1960 paper. Papenburg and others et al. Are journal papers. So in IEEE style, we italicize the foreign language words. Our journal papers, articles of transactions, Viola and others. This is this famous 2020 Viola Jones paper, which came up with face detection, and they did not get the best paper award, but later on in 2001 in ICCV they got the best paper award. It's a reference to a conference paper. So like that, you see, I hope you get this. So I have put that in OLEAF also. If you like, you can request access. You can see how this is done in LaTeX. So I did that in LaTeX. All right. So you see a book. This is a book. Leslie Lamport is a book. So the comma here and the title of the book is italicized, and I've written the edition and the publisher and the year. So it is, you see, comma here, full stop here, comma here, full stop there. So it is very tedious to do them manually. Do not do this listing of the references manually, but use some tool, Microsoft Word or any other thing that you use, or LaTeX. So this is also a book, and this is the article, Rudolf E. Kallmann. So article title is in quotation marks and the comma here. See, a new approach to linear filtering and prediction problems, transactions of ASME journal, whatever. So I have used the abbreviations also as recommended by the IEEE style. So you do not say transactions to preserve space, you say trans period, and so on. Volume, and here the issue is series D and the pagination. So in LaTeX, you know, for the pagination you write 35 in dash 45, right? In dash. So once again, another paper, Papenburg, Brun, Thomas Brooks, and Didas and Vickert, highly accurate optical for computation with theoretically justified grouping, and this got best paper, I think, the conference version. International Journal of Computer Vision, volume, number, pagination, month and year. And this is a conference paper, Viola Jones paper. The conference paper title is in quotation marks and the comma in proceedings of IEEE Conference on Computer Vision and Patent Recognition. This is the top ranked conference. Hawaii, the address. So I think this is, I shouldn't have done that. So I should have written the city and HI. City and HI. So this is, made a mistake there. December 2001 and the pagination. And so on. Okay. And this is a reference. So this is missing the date of access. So that also you have to put. Okay. Then the MLA style, my knowledge about this is very limited. MLA in text citation examples, author's name in text. Magni develops this argument and then give you the page numbers. Author's name in reference. This argument has been developed elsewhere. And Magni and the pagination. Two authors' names in reference. The most notorious foreign lobby in Washington is Sugar Mafia, and then two authors' names. Quotations found in indirect or second-hand source. The philosopher Lane said that admiration is not pleasure but kind of attention. Quoted in like this. I extracted from this book. The format is given, you have to put commas where, periods where, so it's very hard. So that's why you have to use some automated method of doing this. Then the APA style. So just a brief comparison of now this style not only includes referencing style but also the writing also. MLA style, the scholarly issue at work here is the construction of reality, Horn, Adoni and Brand's label in present tense, the construction, a social process in which human beings act both as creators and products of the social world. These writers identify three categories. So you give the pagination also, so in the present tense. In the APA style, the scholarly issue at work here is the construction of reality, on and so on, labeled, past tense, the construction and social process in which human beings are, and so on. These writers have identified three categories. So also, APA style requires that you use present tense for generalizations and references to stable conditions, but it requires a present perfect tense or past tense for sources cited. Examples: sources have tested hypothesis, or the sources reported the result of the test. These next sentences use the correct tense in APA style. The range of steroid use exists. So you see, it's a stable condition, right? It's a common truth. Exists for every age group. Even youngsters, Lloyd and Mercer reported. So this is in past tense. On 6 incidents of liver damage to 14-year-old swimmers who use steroids. Okay, so here are some examples in APA in-text citations. Last name of the author and the year of publication. So you can read it on your own. Not using author's name in text, but using parentheses. Page number, if exact words are quoted. See these quotations and the page number here. More than one author, one and this person, like this. Okay, so again from this book. For 3 or 5 authors, name them all in first entry, example, and so on, but thereafter use at all. For 6 or more authors, employ at all in the first and all subsequent instances. So depending on the different styles, the regulations are different. So I wanted to show you some books that would help you in this writing process. So I found this book to be very useful. Science Research Writing for Non-Native Speakers of English by TL and Hillary. And then these two books are also, this is also very nice. Grammar Trouble Spots. So the mistakes you make with grammar in academic writing. So I also make a lot of mistakes in grammar. So it's very nice to go through this book. If it is too advanced, then you have to read through a grammar book first and look at this book. Okay. So here is an example of APA style writing. So you can see the author year format is there, and then how these have been formatted. So it is very important to use some automated method of doing that. So I have given the link to my OLE file of doing that. So if you need, I'll give you access to this. And then please look at this video also. So I listed the link to this video.
Welcome everyone.
So therefore that would help you to do Microsoft Word's way of citing references. Okay, next we look at the publication process.